The sun hung like a fiery copper penny over the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Colorado, casting long shadows as Tobias Blackburn trudged up the weathered steps to the doctor's office. His hands trembled, not from the chill of the October evening in 1876, but from the fear that had wrapped its cold fingers around his heart for the past 18 hours. Inside that small wooden building, his wife Sarah was fighting for her life and for the life of their unborn child. The town doctor, an aging man named Philip Haynes, with kind eyes and steady hands, met Tobias at the door. The grave expression on his face told Tobias everything before a single word was spoken. "I'm sorry, son," Dr. Haynes said, placing a weathered hand on Tobias's shoulder. "We couldn't save her. The bleeding was too severe." The world seemed to tilt beneath Tobias's boots. His knees threatened to buckle, but somehow he remained standing, suspended in that terrible moment between the life he had known and the unknown future that now yawned before him. "The baby?" he managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Haynes's expression softened slightly. "Your daughter survived. She's small, but she's a fighter." Tobias felt as though he were drowning on dry land. A daughter. He had a daughter. But Sarah, his Sarah, with her honey gold hair and laughing eyes, was gone forever. Inside the doctor's small back room, Tobias gazed down at the tiny bundle wrapped in clean linen. The infant's face was red and wrinkled, her eyes tightly closed, her miniature fingers curled into fists no bigger than a walnut. He reached out with shaking hands to take his daughter, this piece of Sarah that somehow remained in the world. "What will you name her?" Dr. Haynes asked softly. Tobias swallowed hard, remembering nights by the fire when he and Sarah had whispered names back and forth, dreaming of this moment, a moment that was supposed to be filled with joy, not this crushing grief. "Lily," he said finally. Sarah wanted to call her Lily. The weeks that followed passed in a fog of grief and exhaustion. Tobias moved through his days like a man sleepwalking, tending his cattle ranch outside of town, feeding his daughter with milk from a neighbor's goat, accepting the casseroles and quiet condolences of the townsfolk. At night, he would collapse into the empty bed he had once shared with Sarah, little Lily nestled in a makeshift cradle beside him, and stare at the ceiling until exhaustion claimed him. But a man alone with an infant couldn't manage for long in the unforgiving landscape of the Colorado Territory. Tobias's cattle needed tending. The ranch required constant work, and Lily demanded attention that he struggled to provide, while grief weighed on him like a physical burden. It was Mrs. Wilson, the blacksmith's wife, who first suggested he find someone to help. "You need a woman's hand around that place, Tobias," she said after church one Sunday, her eyes kind but direct as she handed back Lily, who had begun to fuss. "Not just for the baby, but for yourself too." "I'm not looking to replace Sarah," he said stiffly. "Nobody's saying that," Mrs. Wilson replied gently. "But that little one needs mothering, and you need help." That's just plain fact. Tobias knew she was right, but the thought of bringing another woman into the home he'd built with Sarah felt like a betrayal. Still, as winter approached and the demands of the ranch grew alongside his struggling daughter, he realized he had little choice. It was the new schoolteacher, Miss Rebecca Fanning, who changed everything. She had arrived in Redemption Creek just 2 weeks after Sarah's passing, taking up residence in the small room behind the schoolhouse. She was not what the town had expected, not a stern-faced spinster, but a young widow of 25 with kind eyes and a quiet strength about her. Their first real meeting came on a bitterly cold November morning. Tobias had brought Lily into town to see Dr. Haynes. The baby had been fussy all night, and though the doctor assured him it was just colic, Tobias couldn't shake his worry. As he left the doctor's office, a sudden gust of wind nearly took his hat, and in his effort to keep it, he lost his grip on the blanket covering Lily. Rebecca Fanning was just leaving the general store when she saw the blanket fly away from the tall, somber man holding the infant. Without hesitation, she chased it down, catching it just before it landed in a muddy puddle. "I believe this belongs to your little one," she said, approaching Tobias and handing him the blanket. Her voice was warm, with a slight lilt that hinted at Eastern origins. "Thank you, madam," Tobias said, awkwardly trying to rewrap Lily while holding her securely. Rebecca watched his struggle for a moment before asking softly, "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Tobias nodded. carefully transferring his daughter into the stranger's arms. With practiced movements, Rebecca tucked the blanket snugly around the infant, her touch gentle but sure. "There we are," she said, smiling down at Lily before handing her back. "Snug as can be." Tobias noticed how Lily had quieted in the woman's arms, how she had gazed up at Rebecca with wide, curious eyes instead of the fretful expression she'd worn all morning. "You have a way with her," he said, surprise evident in his voice. Rebecca's smile held a shadow of sadness. "I was a mother once, briefly. My son would have been 3 this year." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, but heavy with unspoken grief, created an instant bond between them. Tobias recognized in her eyes the same loss that haunted his own. "I'm Tobias Blackburn," he said. "This is Lily, Rebecca Fanning, the new schoolteacher." She looked at Lily with genuine warmth. "She's beautiful, Mr. Blackburn." "She looks like her mother," Tobias said, the words catching in his throat. Rebecca nodded, understanding without requiring explanation. "I've heard about your loss. I'm deeply sorry." In that moment, as they stood on the windswept street with Lily between them, something shifted in Tobias's world, not a dramatic revelation, but a small opening, like a crack in a dam, allowing a trickle of light into the darkness that had enveloped him since Sarah's death. The following Sunday, after church service, Tobias found himself seeking Rebecca out. She was speaking with several of the town's children, her face animated as she answered their questions. When she saw him approaching with Lily, her expression brightened. "Mr. Blackburn," she greeted him, "and little Miss Lily, how are you both today?" "Better," Tobias said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "The colic seems to have passed." "I'm glad to hear it." Rebecca smiled down at Lily, who was awake and looking around with curious eyes. "She seems more alert today." "Miss Fanning," Tobias began, clearing his throat, "I wonder if I might speak with you privately for a moment." Rebecca looked surprised but nodded. "Of course." They moved away from the dispersing congregation, finding a quiet spot beneath one of the old oak trees that shaded the churchyard. "I'll be direct, Miss Fanning," Tobias said, adjusting Lily in his arms. "I find myself in need of help. Lily needs more care than I can give while running the ranch, and with winter coming on." He trailed off, suddenly unsure of his purpose. "Are you looking to hire help, Mr. Blackburn?" Rebecca asked, her expression careful. "I'm not sure what I'm looking for," Tobias admitted honestly. "But I know I can't continue as things are. Mrs. Wilson suggested I find someone to help with Lily, perhaps live at the ranch as a caretaker." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, studying him thoughtfully. "I have my teaching duties, Mr. Blackburn. I couldn't possibly live at your ranch." "Of course," Tobias said quickly, feeling foolish. "I didn't mean to imply—" "But," Rebecca continued, "I would be willing to help you find someone suitable. And perhaps, in the meantime, I could assist with Lily in the evenings, after school hours." Tobias felt a rush of relief. "That would be more than generous, Miss Fanning. Please, call me Rebecca," she said. "And it's not generosity. I've missed being around little ones." She hesitated, then added softly, "Sometimes the best way to honor those we've lost is to share what they taught us with others who need it." For the first time since Sarah's death, Tobias felt something like hope stir within him. The arrangement began the very next day. After dismissing her students, Rebecca would walk the half-mile to Tobias's ranch, where she would spend a few hours caring for Lily, preparing dinner, and teaching Tobias the basics of infant care. Their interactions were awkward at first, both conscious of propriety and the unusual nature of their arrangement, but gradually a comfortable routine developed. Rebecca proved to be not only skilled with Lily, but also a calming presence in the house that had felt so empty. She brought with her books from which she would read aloud while feeding Lily, filling the silent rooms with stories of far-off places and remarkable people. Occasionally, she would sing softly lullabies and folk songs that seemed to soothe not only the baby, but Tobias as well, though he would never have admitted it. As December arrived with its shorter days and biting cold, Tobias found himself increasingly looking forward to the afternoons when Rebecca would arrive. She never attempted to change anything in the house, respecting that it was Sarah's domain still, but her presence somehow made the grief more bearable. One evening, as a blizzard howled outside, Rebecca sat in the rocking chair by the fire, Lily asleep in her arms. Tobias, returning from checking on the livestock in the barn, paused in the doorway. Struck by the tableau they created, the firelight playing on Rebecca's dark hair, her face peaceful as she gazed down at his daughter. "You should stay tonight," he said without preamble. "The storm's getting worse. It wouldn't be safe for you to walk back to town." Rebecca looked up, startled. "I wouldn't want to impose—" "It's not an imposition," Tobias interrupted. "It would be foolish to risk the walk in this weather." After a moment's consideration, Rebecca nodded. "Thank you. That's very kind." That night, Rebecca slept in Lily's room, on a small cot Tobias set up, while Lily remained in her cradle nearby. Tobias lay awake in his own room, acutely aware of Rebecca's presence just down the hall. It wasn't impropriety that concerned him. The townspeople would understand the necessity given the storm, but rather the realization that, for the first time since Sarah's death, the house felt alive again. The blizzard continued for 2 days, forcing Rebecca to remain at the ranch. During that time, a subtle shift occurred in their relationship. Without the pressure to leave by nightfall, their conversations extended into the evenings, ranging from Rebecca's childhood in Pennsylvania to Tobias's journey west after the war. He learned that she had married young, at 18, to a man who had died of pneumonia just months after their son was born. The baby, frail from birth, had followed his father a year later. "Is that why you came west?" Tobias asked as they sat before the fire on the second night, Lily sleeping peacefully in her cradle. "To leave those memories behind?" Rebecca considered the question, her fingers absently tracing the pattern on her teacup. "Not to leave them behind exactly. More to find a place where those memories weren't embedded in everything around me." She looked up at him with understanding in her eyes. "But I've learned you can't outrun grief. It travels with you." "Yes," Tobias agreed quietly. "It does. But so does love," Rebecca added softly. "That travels with you too." When the storm finally broke and the roads cleared enough for travel, Rebecca prepared to return to town. Standing in the doorway with her coat and bag, she seemed reluctant to leave. "I've been thinking," Tobias said, shifting Lily in his arms. "The school term ends soon for Christmas break, doesn't it?" Rebecca nodded. 2 weeks starting Friday. "Would you consider staying here during that time, as Lily's caretaker, properly compensated?" "Of course." He hurried on before she could respond. "It would help me tremendously with the winter work on the ranch, and you seemed comfortable here during the storm." Rebecca studied his face for a long moment. "Are you sure, Tobias? I wouldn't want to intrude on your memories." Tobias understood what she was really asking. Was he ready to have another woman living in the home he had shared with Sarah, even temporarily? "I think," he said slowly, "that Sarah would want Lily to be well cared for, and she would approve of you." Rebecca's eyes softened. "Then yes, I would be happy to stay during the break." The Christmas season brought a gentle peace to the ranch. Rebecca decorated the small house with pine boughs and red berries, made gingerbread that filled the rooms with spicy sweetness, and even convinced Tobias to cut a small tree that they adorned with paper stars and candles. To his surprise, these new traditions didn't diminish his memories of Christmas with Sarah, but somehow made them more precious, less painful to recall. On Christmas Eve, after Lily was asleep, Rebecca presented Tobias with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "It isn't much," she said, suddenly shy, "but I wanted you to have something." Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "I thought you might like to write down memories of Sarah," Rebecca explained, "for Lily when she's older, so she can know her mother through your eyes." Tobias ran his fingers over the smooth leather, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is perfect." He had a gift for her as well, a delicate silver brooch he had purchased from the jeweler in town, simple but elegant. "It reminded me of you," he said as she opened it. "Beautiful without being showy." Rebecca's cheeks colored at the compliment as she pinned the brooch to her dress. "It's lovely, Tobias. Thank you." They sat together by the fire late into the night, talking softly, sharing stories of Christmases past and, for the first time, tentatively imagining Christmas's future. When the new year arrived, bringing with it the return of Rebecca's teaching duties, neither was eager to return to their previous arrangement. It was Reverend Johnston who provided an unexpected solution, approaching Tobias after Sunday service in early January. "Mr. Blackburn, might I have a word?" the Reverend asked, drawing Tobias aside. "I've been observing your situation with Miss Fanning." Tobias tensed, preparing for a lecture on propriety. "Now, don't misunderstand me," the Reverend continued. "I think it's a fine arrangement for the care of your daughter, but tongues are beginning to wag in town, and I'd hate to see Miss Fanning's reputation suffer." "There's nothing improper happening," Tobias said firmly. "I believe you," Reverend Johnston assured him, "but perception can be as damaging as reality. I have a suggestion, if you're amenable. My sister-in-law, Mrs. Abernathy, is a widow of considerable years and impeccable character. She's looking to earn her keep, and I believe she would be willing to serve as a chaperone at your ranch when Miss Fanning is present." Tobias considered the suggestion. "That seems reasonable." "Excellent. And Mr. Blackburn," the Reverend added with a knowing look, "should your feelings for Miss Fanning develop in a certain direction, I would be most happy to officiate." Tobias felt heat rise to his face. "I'm not looking to remarry, Reverend." "Of course not," the man said kindly, "but sometimes the heart has plans we're not yet ready to acknowledge." With Mrs. Abernathy installed as a proper chaperone, Rebecca was able to continue her evening visits to the ranch without risking her reputation. The older woman proved to be a blessing in disguise. Not only was she discreet and kind, but she was also an excellent cook who took over much of the meal preparation, allowing Rebecca to focus her attention on Lily and her lessons. Winter gradually gave way to the first tentative signs of spring. Lily grew stronger each day, beginning to smile responsively and reach for familiar faces. Tobias found himself recording these moments in the journal Rebecca had given him, alongside memories of Sarah creating a history for his daughter that encompassed both the mother she had lost and the present that unfolded around her. One evening in early April, as Rebecca sat on the porch with Lily while Tobias mended a bridle nearby, she broke their comfortable silence with an unexpected question. "Do you think you'll ever marry again, Tobias?" He looked up, startled by her directness. Rebecca's gaze remained on Lily, but a faint blush colored her cheeks. "I haven't thought about it," he said, though this wasn't entirely true. In recent weeks he had found himself wondering what it might be like to have Rebecca's presence in his home permanently, to build a life together rather than merely sharing parts of one. "I apologize," Rebecca said quickly. "That was too personal a question." "No," Tobias assured her. "It's a fair thing to ask." He set aside the bridle, considering his words carefully. "For a long time after Sarah died, I couldn't imagine it. The very idea felt like a betrayal." "And now?" Rebecca asked softly, finally meeting his eyes. "Now I think Sarah wouldn't want me to be alone, or Lily to grow up without a mother's love." He paused, gathering his courage. "Why do you ask?" Rebecca looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep in her arms. "Because I've grown to care for her very much, and for you." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know I'm not Sarah. I would never try to replace her in your heart or in Lily's life. But I wondered if, perhaps, there might be room for me too." The simple honesty of her words struck Tobias deeply. Before he could respond, the door opened behind them, and Mrs. Abernathy appeared, effectively ending their conversation. That night, after everyone had retired, Tobias sat at his desk with the journal open before him. He began to write, not memories this time, but thoughts confused, hopeful, frightened thoughts about the possibility of loving again, about whether his heart, so long closed in grief, could open once more. The following Sunday, Tobias sought out Rebecca after church. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. "Mrs. Abernathy has Lily." They strolled toward the creek that gave the town its name, its banks lush with spring growth. When they reached a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree, Tobias stopped. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about there being room in my heart." Rebecca waited, her expression open but guarded, as if preparing herself for rejection. "When Sarah died," Tobias continued, "I thought that part of me died with her, the part that could love, that could see a future beyond grief. He looked out at the flowing water. "But these past months with you and Lily, I've realized that's not true. The heart is more adaptable than I believed." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not ready to marry again, Rebecca. Not yet. I need to be sure that if I make that commitment again, it's with my whole heart, not just out of gratitude or convenience." Rebecca nodded, disappointment evident in her eyes despite her attempt to hide it. "But," Tobias continued, reaching for her hand, "I would like to court you properly, if you're willing to be patient with a man who's still finding his way back to living." Rebecca's face brightened, a smile transforming her features. "I would like that very much, Tobias." The courtship that followed was unlike any in Redemption Creek's memory. It progressed with deliberate care, each step taken with awareness of the past that had shaped them both. Tobias began inviting Rebecca to Sunday dinners, to community gatherings, and occasionally to accompany him and Lily on visits to neighboring ranches. They attended the town's spring social together, raising eyebrows but also receiving many approving smiles. Through it all, Lily remained the center of their shared world. The baby thrived under Rebecca's care, growing into a cheerful infant who reached eagerly for them both. Tobias watched with a mixture of joy and wistfulness as his daughter formed a bond with Rebecca, grateful for the maternal love she received, yet unable to completely silence the voice that whispered, Sarah should have been there to see her child grow. On a warm evening in late May, as they sat on the porch swing after Lily had been put to bed, Rebecca sensed Tobias's melancholy. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "About Sarah." Tobias looked surprised. "You want to hear about Sarah?" Rebecca nodded. "She's part of who you are, Tobias, part of Lily. I want to know her through your eyes." So he spoke of Sarah, of her determination to make their rough cabin a home, of her terrible cooking that had improved with hilarious failed attempts, of her dream to create a garden that would rival the finest in St. Louis. He spoke of her courage during a difficult winter, her laughter that could lift his spirits no matter how hard the day had been, her fierce love for the child growing within her. As he spoke, tears came not the desperate, choking sobs of fresh grief, but the gentler tears of remembrance. And Rebecca, instead of pulling away, moved closer, her hand finding his in silent support. "She sounds remarkable," Rebecca said when he had finished. "She was," Tobias agreed. Then, after a moment, he added, "But so are you, in your own way. Different, but equally remarkable." Rebecca's eyes glistened in the fading light. "Tobias," she said softly, "I need you to know something. I don't want to erase Sarah from your life or from Lily's. I would never want that." She took a deep breath before continuing. "When I lost my son, what hurt most wasn't just his absence, but the fear that he would be forgotten, that no one else would remember his laugh or the way his nose wrinkled when he smiled." Her voice trembled slightly. "I don't want that for Lily. I don't want Sarah to become someone we don't speak of." Tobias felt something shift within him at her words, as if a burden he hadn't fully recognized was suddenly lifted. "Let me raise her memory with you," Rebecca whispered, her eyes earnest in the gathering dusk. "Let me help Lily know the mother who loved her enough to give her life. We can do that together, can't we? Honor what was while building what could be." In that moment, Tobias Blackburn understood that what he felt for Rebecca wasn't a replacement for his love for Sarah, but something new, a love built not in spite of their shared losses, but partly because of them. It was a love tempered by grief, deepened by understanding, strengthened by shared purpose. Without words, he leaned forward and kissed her their first kiss, gentle and questioning. When he pulled away, Rebecca's eyes were shining with unshed tears and something else. Hope. "Yes," he said simply. "We can do that together." Summer brought a flurry of activity to Redemption Creek. The town prepared for its Independence Day celebration. Ranchers worked long days tending cattle and crops. And at the little schoolhouse, Rebecca concluded her first full year of teaching. Through it all, her courtship with Tobias progressed with steady certainty. Mrs. Abernathy, who had initially been hired as a chaperone, had become a fixture at the ranch, her motherly presence a comfort to them all. She had taken to calling herself Grandma Abby to Lily, who, now nearly 8 months old, delighted everyone with her attempts to crawl and her infectious giggles. "She has Sarah's determination," Tobias remarked one evening, as they watched Lily doggedly pursuing a wooden ball that kept rolling just beyond her reach. "And your stubbornness," Rebecca added with a smile. Tobias laughed, the sound no longer rare as it had been in the early months of their acquaintance. Fair point. The 4th of July celebration brought the entire community together for a day of food, games, and festivities, culminating in a dance at the newly constructed town hall. Tobias, who had avoided such gatherings since Sarah's death, found himself looking forward to the event, particularly after Rebecca shyly confessed she had made a new dress for the occasion. When he arrived at her small house behind the schoolhouse to escort her to the celebration, Tobias was struck by the vision she presented. The dress was a soft blue that brought out the gray in her eyes, modest but flattering, with a small bouquet of wildflowers pinned at the collar, the silver brooch he had given her for Christmas securing them in place. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Rebecca smiled, a becoming blush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Blackburn." At the celebration, they moved through the crowd as a unit, Tobias carrying Lily, who was dressed in a white gown Rebecca had sewn, while Rebecca walked beside them, occasionally greeting her students and their parents. Many of the townspeople watched them with approving smiles. The unofficial family they had become over the past months. As evening fell and lanterns were lit for the dance, Mrs. Abernathy appeared to take charge of a sleepy Lily. "You two enjoy yourselves," she insisted. "This little one and I will be just fine watching from the sidelines." The music began, a lively reel that had couples lining up on the makeshift dance floor. Tobias hesitated, suddenly unsure. It had been so long since he had danced, not since before Sarah's pregnancy. Rebecca sensed his uncertainty. "We don't have to dance, if you'd rather not," she said gently. Tobias looked around at the happy faces, at the community that had supported him through his darkest days, and made a decision. Taking Rebecca's hand, he led her to the dance floor. "I might be a bit rusty," he warned. Rebecca's smile was radiant. "Then we'll be rusty together." They danced through the evening, sometimes gracefully, sometimes with missteps that led to laughter, but always together. As the night wore on, the music slowed, and Tobias found himself holding Rebecca closer than propriety might strictly allow, her head resting against his shoulder as they swayed to the gentle melody. "Rebecca," he said softly, his voice nearly lost in the music. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Yes, I love you." The words, so simple and yet so profound, hung between them for a heartbeat. Then Rebecca's face transformed with joy. "And I love you, Tobias Blackburn, with all my heart." Later, as they walked home beneath a sky ablaze with stars, Lily sleeping soundly in Mrs. Abernathy's arms ahead of them, Tobias stopped suddenly in the middle of the path. "Marry me," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Not someday, not when more time has passed. Soon. Be my wife, be Lily's mother." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Tobias, are you certain? I don't want you to feel rushed." "I've never been more certain of anything," he interrupted. "Life is too short and too precious to wait when you know what your heart wants. And my heart wants you, Rebecca Fanning. It wants the family we could be together." Rebecca searched his face in the moonlight, finding only sincerity and love reflected there. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding took place in late August, a simple ceremony in the town church, with Reverend Johnston officiating. The entire community turned out for the event, filling the small building to capacity. Mrs. Abernathy held Lily, now nearly 10 months old, who wore a dress made from a piece of Sarah's wedding gown, Rebecca's idea, her way of ensuring Sarah was present on this important day. During the ceremony, when it came time to exchange vows, Rebecca surprised Tobias by adding a promise of her own. "I vow to cherish not only you and Lily," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed church, "but also the memory of Sarah, who will always be a part of our family. I will make sure her daughter knows the brave, loving woman who gave her life." There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Tobias, overcome with emotion, completed his own vows. When Reverend Johnston pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up seemed to lift the very rafters of the old building. The celebration afterward was held on the grounds of what was now their ranch, no longer just Tobias's place, but a home they would build together. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Tobias found a moment alone with his new wife beneath the same cottonwood tree where they had shared their first kiss. "Happy?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. Rebecca's smile was answer enough, but she spoke anyway. "More than I ever imagined possible again." "I know what you mean," Tobias said, his thoughts momentarily drifting to the journal he still kept, where memories of Sarah now shared pages with the story of his life with Rebecca and Lily. "It's strange how life works out, how loss can lead to finding something you weren't even looking for." "Not a replacement," Rebecca said, understanding his unspoken thought, "but a continuation, a new chapter in the same story." Tobias nodded, grateful once again for her intuitive understanding. "Exactly." From across the yard came the sound of Lily's laugh as Mrs. Abernathy bounced her on her knee. The baby caught sight of them and immediately began reaching out, her face lighting up with recognition and love. "I think someone wants her parents," Rebecca said with a smile. Parents. The word still sometimes caught Tobias by surprise, the reality that he and Rebecca were now a family, that Lily would grow up calling this remarkable woman mother, that life had somehow circled back to joy when he had thought it impossible. As they walked together to claim their daughter, Tobias felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The grief would never completely disappear. It had become part of him, just as his love for Sarah had, but it no longer defined his existence. Instead, it had become the foundation upon which he and Rebecca were building something new. A family bound not only by love, but by a shared understanding of loss and renewal. The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. Lily grew from a baby to a toddler to a little girl with Sarah's golden hair and Tobias's determined chin. She called Rebecca Mama without hesitation, but also knew the story of the mother who had given her life, a story told often and with love, accompanied by the few treasured photographs they possessed and the memories Tobias had carefully preserved. In the spring following their first anniversary, Rebecca discovered she was expecting. The mixture of joy and fear that accompanied this news was something they faced together, both acutely aware of what could be lost, but choosing to embrace the hope of what might be gained. When their son was born, a healthy, robust boy they named Thomas. After Tobias's father, it felt like the closing of a circle. Rebecca, holding her newborn son, while Lily, now nearly 3, peered curiously at her baby brother, looked up at Tobias with tears of joy in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around them both. "For this second chance, for our family." Tobias leaned down to kiss her, then touched his son's tiny hand with wonder. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," he said. "You brought life back to this house, to me, when I thought that part of me was gone forever." Rebecca smiled, the wisdom of her own journey evident in her eyes. "That's the miracle of love, isn't it? It never truly ends. It just finds new ways to exist." Outside the window, the Colorado sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, the mountains stood as they always had, witnessing the cycles of loss and renewal that shaped the lives of those who dwelled in their shadow. Within the walls of the ranch house, now filled with the sounds of children and laughter, Tobias and Rebecca Blackburn had created something neither had dared hope for after their respective tragedies, a home where memories were honored but not enshrined, where grief was acknowledged but not revered, where love, in all its complex forms, was the foundation upon which everything else was built. In the years to come, there would be more children, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Rebecca's mother, and another son who arrived unexpectedly when Lily was 12. The ranch would prosper, expanding as Tobias's hard work and careful management paid off. Rebecca would eventually take over the running of Redemption Creek's small library, sharing her love of books with generations of children, including her own. And throughout it all, the promise made that evening on the porch would be kept. Sarah's memory remained alive in their home, not as a ghost to be feared or a shadow looming over their happiness, but as a cherished part of their family's story. On her birthday each year, they would visit the small grave beneath the cottonwood tree, bringing flowers and sharing stories. As the children grew, they came to understand that love didn't diminish when shared, it multiplied. On a warm autumn evening in 1901, 25 years after that fateful day when Tobias had climbed the steps to Dr. Haynes's office, he and Rebecca sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset. Their youngest son was away at college. Lily was married with children of her own, and the other children were finding their paths in a world that seemed to change more rapidly with each passing year. "Do you ever wonder," Rebecca asked, her hand finding Tobias's as it had countless times over their years together, "what Sarah would think of the life we've built?" Tobias, his dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, considered the question. "I think she would be proud," he said finally. "Proud of Lily, proud of how we've honored her memory, proud that we found happiness again." Rebecca nodded, leaning against his shoulder. "I'd like to believe that Henry feels the same," she said, referring to her first husband. "That somehow they know their love lives on in the family we've created." "I'm sure they do," Tobias said, his voice certain. For, although he had never been a particularly religious man, the years had given him a faith of his own, not in dogma or doctrine, but in the enduring nature of love, in its ability to transcend even death itself. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Tobias reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point, from the deepest grief to the most profound joy. From a whispered promise on a porch to a lifetime shared, it was a path he could never have imagined on that dark day when he thought his heart had died, along with Sarah. But Rebecca had been right all those years ago. Love traveled with you, finding new expressions, new vessels, new ways to illuminate the darkness. And in the end, that was the true legacy they would leave, not just the ranch or the family name, but the example of two people who had faced the worst life could offer and still chosen to open their hearts again, to risk loss for the promise of love. "I love you, Rebecca Blackburn," Tobias said softly, the words no less meaningful for having been spoken thousands of times over their years together. Rebecca smiled, the same smile that had first awakened his heart to the possibility of loving again. "And I love you, Tobias Blackburn, today and always." In the growing darkness, their hands remained intertwined, a simple gesture that contained within it the whole of their story. Love lost, love found, and love chosen, day after day, through all the seasons of their shared life. It was not the ending either of them had originally envisioned for themselves, but it was an ending, or, rather, a continuing filled with more joy than either had dared to hope for in the aftermath of their respective losses. And in that, there was a kind of perfection that no original plan could have surpassed.